in my humble opinion, because I'm a big Anthony Joshua fan. Of course, I've been a supporter for the longest time. A rather lackluster, unmotivated Anthony Joshua that didn't look like he was being particularly nasty, right? Yeah, a lot of the time he was out of range, and okay, it is hard to land a shot on someone that's backing up and moving away the whole time. And there was a lot of times where he had him in the corner and he could have thrown a shot. And sometimes he was telegraphing his shots. And anytime he did go in to throw a punch, as I said before, Jake Paul would shoot in and turn it into a wrestling match. And even when he wasn't shooting in, he was clinching a lot. This is boxing. It's not MMA, as we know. The referee should have done a much better job of getting in there and separating them much, much faster. As I say, it was the 6th round. I think it was the 4th round he got dropped twice. In the 5th round, he got through it. In the 6th round, caught him with the jab, then a glancing right hook. He goes down, and that was that. That was all she wrote, right? I did a live. There was about 9,000 people watching at one point. Nobody was particularly enjoying the matchup. Listen, okay? I respect both men. I respect anyone really that steps into the ring, okay? And certainly going up against Anthony Joshua, that was a tall task, okay? You know, metaphorically and figuratively, right? It was a tall task. It was a big job. It was a tough opponent. It was a mismatch, and it was, right? Jake Paul never worried Anthony Joshua once. He never rung his bell. He never caused any damage. He never had him worried. He never did anything. It wasn't a fight. It was a display of how long can Jake Paul last? Can he run away long enough to...
It's fun. I love this sport. I gave it my all. It's fucking crazy. I had a blast, and thank you to all the fans and everyone.
The neon-soaked skyline of Miami has seen its fair share of spectacles, but what unfolded at the Kaseya Center on December 19th, 2025, was something that transcended the typical boundaries of sports and entered the realm of a cultural fever dream. The air inside the arena was thick with a mixture of irony, genuine tension, and the electric hum of a global audience tuning in via Netflix.
Anthony Joshua knocks out Jake Paul in the 6th round of their fight on Netflix.
Fell after this. Like legitimately just to play like safety and just deck people. No, I swear to God. I'm about to bring hella ratings to whatever team I'm on.
Where would you want to go if you can go to any team?
Shit, the Browns.
So
I can run a 4.34.
He's the fastest man on the planet.
I got hands. I have the size, the power. I can knock people out with one punch. So why can't I play free safety?
Do you think you coming into the NFL would be the equivalent of like when an NFL player says, I'm going to try to box now?
No, because I played football my whole life. At the end of the day, it's coverage, knowing your plays, and then just being fast.
It was a night the problem child finally faced a problem he couldn't solve with a clever tweet or a carefully selected opponent. Anthony Joshua, a man who carries the weight of a 2-time unified heavyweight champion on his broad shoulders, stood in one corner, a monolithic figure of traditional boxing pedigree. In the other stood Jake Paul, the disruptor who had turned the sweet science into a digital-first gold mine.
Throw a shot, he would lunge in, jump in, and because he was so short, he'd miss. And then he ended up stumbling over his feet and falling over. Sometimes in that fight, he reminded me of, have you seen that Kung Fu film called The Drunken Master? Except for he wasn't a master. There's a Kung Fu guy who walks around and normally kicks people's ass, but he looks drunk all the time. That's what that fight reminded me of. It was such a poor showing from Jake Paul. You know, I mean, it's a well-documented fact. There was a lot of money on the line. And I'm sure you, Max, as I would, and anybody else in the street would fight Anthony Joshua for 75 million. You just would. And the same thing would happen. And even after the fight, now the fight's over, you're 75 million.
Clash was never just about a win-loss record. It was a collision of two entirely different worlds. And by the time the 6th round reached its violent conclusion, only one world remained standing. The journey to that 6th round knockout was a masterclass in the psychological and physical disparities that exist at the highest levels of combat sports.
You just will never be a good fighter, so I wish that I could have knocked him out at the start. But as we saw,
me like sparring.
Yeah.
When I watched it, which, you know, look, I paid for it. They got me. I thought it was going to be a real fight.
From the opening bell, the atmosphere was one of eerie anticipation. Jake Paul, aware of the sheer physical disadvantage he faced, opted for a strategy that could only be described as a high-stakes game of tag. He wasn't just fighting, he was surviving. Every time Joshua stepped forward, Paul was on his horse, circling the perimeter of the massive 22-foot ring like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. It was a roadrunner impression that drew groans from the 9,000-strong live crowd and sparked a firestorm of rigged...
No emotion, a job and a mission that needs to be completed.
And as soon as it broke out, I was over on the other side and I go, "Fuck, I know exactly what that is."
Accusations on social media. Analysts like Duke McKenzie would later observe that every time Paul attempted to launch an offensive, he looked less like a pugilist and more like a character from a kung fu film, stumbling, lunging, and eventually falling over his own feet. He was a drunken master, minus the mastery, a man so undersized and outclassed that his punches often failed to even reach the target. Yet, for all the criticism of Paul's elusive tactics, there was a grim reality unfolding in the center of the ring. Anthony Joshua was a man possessed by a quiet, patient fury. He didn't rush. He didn't telegraph his intentions. He simply loomed, cutting off the ring with the methodical precision of a predator who knows the prey has nowhere left to go. The fourth round was the beginning of the end. The dodgy feeling of the early rounds evaporated as Joshua began to find his range. The speed and power that had dismantled world-class heavyweights were now being funneled toward a man who, until a few years ago, was known for YouTube pranks. Paul was dropped twice in the fifth round, his body collapsing under the weight of shots that would have ended most men's nights instantly. It was a display of intestinal fortitude, as some called it, or perhaps just a refusal to let the dream die before the cameras stopped rolling. By the sixth round, the narrative of a scripted or rigged event was shattered alongside Jake Paul's jaw. The knockout wasn't just a punch. It was a punctuation mark. A stiff jab followed by a glancing, yet devastating right hook sent Paul to the canvas for the final time. The silence that followed in the arena was deafening, broken only by the sound of medical professionals rushing to the ring. The post-fight statistics painted a harrowing picture of the mismatch. Joshua had landed 48 surgical strikes compared to Paul's 16. It wasn't a fight. It was an eviction notice. Jake Paul, ever the showman, managed to mutter through the haze a suspected broken jaw that he had a blast. But the reality was far more sober. He was rushed to Miami University Hospital, bypassing the press conference, as his team realized the full extent of the damage. A double broken jaw, snapped and requiring immediate surgical intervention, became the physical proof that no matter how much money is on the line, the ring does not lie. The reaction from the boxing world was swift and merciless. On social media, the platform formerly known as Twitter exploded with a mix of vitriol and relief. Jake Paul knocked out. His career is over. "This bum is done," read one viral post, echoing a sentiment held by many purists who felt Paul had made a mockery of the sport. Former UFC champion Michael Bisping described the performance as a masterclass by Joshua, noting that even though Paul tried to turn the match into a wrestling contest through constant clinching, he couldn't escape the inevitable. The damage to Paul's face was so severe that analysts like Liam Goff warned the avenues for his boxing career might be permanently closed. A double jaw break is not just an injury. It's a career-altering trauma that requires months of liquid diets and grueling rehabilitation. The problem child was suddenly a patient, thanking the staff at Miami University Hospital for their care while facing a year or more on the sidelines. Interestingly, even in defeat, Jake Paul's ability to pivot remains his greatest strength. From his hospital bed, or perhaps just before the surgery, the talk shifted from the squared circle to the gridiron. In a move that feels both absurd and entirely characteristic, Paul hinted at a transition to the NFL. He claimed a 4.34 40-yard dash and expressed a legitimate desire to play safety for Cleveland Browns, promising to bring hella ratings to any team brave enough to sign him. He argued that his life of boxing had prepared him for the physical sacrifice of the NFL, asserting that coverage and knowing your plays was something he could master. To the average observer, it sounds like another clown show delusion, but in the economy of attention that Paul inhabits, it's a brilliant way to keep the conversation moving away from the image of his head snapping back under an Anthony Joshua jab. The rigged narrative, however, refuses to die quietly, despite the x-rays and the surgical reports. Some fans pointed to Joshua's supposedly lackluster performance in the early rounds as evidence of a scripted affair. But as veteran analysts pointed out, Fighting a beginner is often more difficult than fighting a pro. The movements are awkward, the timing is nonsensical, and the primary goal of the opponent is survival rather than victory. Joshua wasn't taking it easy. He was solving a puzzle that didn't follow the traditional rules of the sport. Once the solution was found, the result was a brutal reminder of why weight classes and professional experience exist. Joshua protected his legacy, refusing to tarnish his name by playing along with any supposed script, and in doing so, he may have saved the sport from its own circus-like tendencies. As the dust settles on the Kasaya Center, the question remains, what happens next for Anthony Joshua? It was a lucrative detour, a chance to collect a massive payday while reminding the world of his sheer physical dominance. For Jake Paul, it is a crossroads. He has the money. Rumors of a $75 million purse suggest he is better off financially than almost any other fighter on the planet. But he no longer has the aura of invincibility that allowed him to bait legitimate athletes into his world. His talk of a 2026 return, perhaps against Tyson Fury, or in a rematch with Tommy Fury, feels more like a marketing strategy than a realistic athletic goal. If his jaw truly is snapped, the biological clock on his fighting career may have just run out.